Undoubtedly, climate change is one of the main issues here, as the African Development Bank Group in its meeting really exploring a number of priorities really that are facing the continent, that they are trying to achieve around resilience when it comes to climate change environment, but also just a just energy transition. We do know countries like South Africa, they're working so hard in terms of their own energy transition. But of course, joining us now is of course Mr. Phillips. Of course, he's with the bank. So sir, thank you so much indeed, Gareth, for your time. I suppose the very first question is, we see the very severe impact of the climate change, and your president Adesina has been very clear, stating in no uncertain terms that it's killing Africa. So in terms of the role of the bank, what are some of the very key initiatives that you're leading to try and deal with this phenomenon?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. So indeed, climate change is a major challenge for the African continent, and we see this every day in more extreme weather events and indeed slow onset events, gradual increase in temperature and so on. And this, first and foremost, is having a huge impact on Africa's farming communities. We have 600 million farmers in Africa who rely on rainfall for growing their crops. And if the rains are variable, if they're late or too heavy, then it can impact their productivity. And as soon as that falls, then we see families, households, communities falling back into poverty. And of course, addressing poverty is the African Development Bank's main goal. So climate change is really threatening this. It's pushing people back into poverty, keeping them in poverty. And so many of the programs that we have in the bank are aimed at addressing this. For example, we have big programs on food security and nutrition, helping farmers grow heat-adapted varieties of crops and transition from rain-fed agriculture to irrigated drip irrigation agriculture using solar pumps and things like that. We're also working very hard on processing zones, staple crop processing zones, to ensure that we don't lose so much food from rotting during its production. If we can process food, add value to it, reduce the losses and so on, then we can have a great impact upon nutrition, food security for the continent. We're also addressing the other side of the coin is greenhouse gas emissions, where we need to help reduce those emissions, because it's those emissions that are causing the problem at a global scale. So for South Africa, for example, and I'm sure we'll talk more about the just energy transition, the bank is promoting renewable energy and a number of initiatives to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
And obviously the road to COP27 in Egypt, I suppose that's another very key area to make sure that Africa does have a common position, especially because the very terrible tragedy here is that when you look at the contribution in terms of the gas emission, the continent is the least contributor, but in terms of the very severe consequences, it seems to be bearing the brunt of the very awful impact.
Indeed. So COP27, we have the COPs every year. Last year was in Glasgow, and this year is an African COP in Egypt, so we'll be extra busy ensuring that Africa is very well represented. But I think some of the major issues that we'll be seeing addressed there will revolve around climate finance. It's about mobilizing this $100 billion that the developed countries promised to assist developing countries to develop. We're a little bit late on reaching that goal, so we really want to see action towards that achievement and increasing the amount of finance. But actually, we need to go way beyond $100 billion in the overall cost. At a global scale, that's a drop in the ocean. So the challenge is about bringing the private sector on board and creating environments and investment opportunities that are attractive to those. And that's where the African Development Bank really excels. That is our main role, is accessing concessional finance, blending it, helping investors manage risk, and crowding in private sector finance. And the climate change offers us tremendous opportunities to do that and to bring finance for the benefit of the continent. And COP27 is where hopefully we will see more progress on some of these key issues.
And obviously the developed world, how do you convince them? Because we've seen the reluctance, these commitments, the pledges have been made, but so far they've been really reluctant in terms of making sure that they allocate these funds to the developing world in adaptation, mitigation, and many other aspects.
So, they've been reluctant, but it's not easy. It's not easy to allocate money into projects. You can't just say, here's the money, go and do it. It takes time. time. So, we do have to work on that. Adaptation is a particularly challenging area to mobilize resources, but it's actually an area that the African Development Bank has been making some very significant progress in. We've partnered with the Global Centre on Adaptation to launch the African Adaptation Acceleration Programme with a target of doubling the adaptation finance coming to Africa from $12.5 billion to $25 billion by 2025. And within the African Adaptation Acceleration Programme, we have two initiatives that are, we're very hopeful will mobilize more funds. The first is the Adaptation Benefits Mechanism, which will pay project developers for delivering adaptation benefits. And so that the purpose of that is to make projects that are otherwise financially unattractive, to make them viable and attractive to the private sector. And the second that we're working on is the creation of green banks. And actually, Africa has one of the first operating green banks developed by Development Bank of South Africa, their climate finance facility. And the purpose of a green bank is to lend funds to Paris-aligned adaptation mitigation projects, specifically set up and capitalized to do that. There's many advantages to the creation of these institutions at a national scale, and the African Development Bank is now developing a program to support that initiative as well.
And just before I let you go, Gareth, you talk about South Africa. Obviously, we do know that they talk about this ambitious goal of just energy transition. How do you make sure that it doesn't become abrupt, it becomes like a gradual phase, so that you're not destabilizing your energy mix? And what would be your message to other African countries as well to have a buy-in and see the seriousness in just energy transition?
Yes, so of course it's a very complex process to transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy. It cannot happen overnight. There are many moving parts, and the scale in South Africa is daunting. So the African Development Bank is in the process of putting together a financing package that we think can help move that process forward very significantly with the support of donors. As you'll be aware, donors pledged $8.5 billion at the Glasgow COP, and it's about taking that money and leveraging it up to meet a target. I understand in the region of $60 to $64 billion is the estimated price tag for the transition. So it's a major financial exercise in the first instance, and then you've got the technical challenges of how you actually physically do that. So we'll be working with the South African authorities to make progress on that. Success in Africa, in South Africa with this initiative, will demonstrate to the rest of the world, because there are other countries, Indonesia, the Philippines, and many other countries that rely heavily on coal, that need to make a similar transition. So the spotlight will be on South Africa to see how this process moves forward.
All right, so thank you so much indeed for your time. Of course, he's with the bank, working so hard in terms of making sure that just energy transition becomes a reality. So like he said, that this could be a very game changer for South Africa and also contribute significantly in terms of the positive aspect as they move towards a just energy transition.